Today marks the last day of what has been a record-breaking period of early voting in Georgia.
The question about voter suppression and voter turnout is causation without correlation. I'm sorry, you can make mistakes even when you know what you're talking about. It's correlation without causation. We know that increased turnout has nothing to do with suppression.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about the Democrat conspiracy theory of voter suppression being debunked as the Georgia primary had record voter turnout, okay? After Democrats spent the last year and a half boo-hoo, whining, crying, complaining about the GOP voting laws suppressing the black vote. Black people can't vote because the GOP voting laws. They keeping black folk from vote. They can't get the ID, so they can't vote. Bruh. So, yeah, fast forward to 2022. After Georgia passed their Jim Crow voter integrity laws, yeah, there's record turnout, right? And you would think that just using some common sense, right, that if there's record turnout for the primary, right, in regards to voting, that would indicate that these laws aren't doing a good job at suppressing the vote, right? They're not doing a good job, okay? I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that, hey, you know what? Maybe this might have been exaggerated, right? Or just outright a lie, right? That's actually what it was. It was really just a lie, okay? But with that being said, the Democrats, however, are not going to let go of this conspiracy, okay? As they're actually doubling and tripling down on the idea that there is still voter suppression despite record voter turnout in Georgia, right? And there's some people that are pissed, okay? Particularly in the mainstream liberal media, because record turnout in Georgia basically, again, is evidence to suggest that, hey, you know what? Maybe these laws don't really restrict the vote. Maybe people who actually want to vote are going to vote no matter what, right? They're going to vote, right? So they're not really liking this all that much, right? So they're fuming over this, right? They're mad. And one of those people that are mad and upset about this is Joy Reid, okay, who did an interview with Miss Stacey Abrams. And I want you guys to take a look at their cry fest they have together over Georgia having record voter turnout for the primaries, and the idea that debunks their conspiracy theory that the racist Jim Crow election integrity laws are actually suppressing people from voting. Take a look.
The former president's big lie in Georgia has also led Georgia to become ground zero for voter suppression, with its Jim Crow version 2.0 voting law put in place last year by Republicans using a baseless assertion of fraud. And Republicans, with the help from some in the political press, are now using the huge turnout in the primary so far to push a new big lie, that the record turnout, which is mainly from Republican primary voters, means that Georgia's suppressive voting law is not suppressive at all, despite the fact that the voters that it was meant to harm most are not voting in contested primaries, meaning the real test for how the law affects them will come in November. Joining me now is Stacey Abrams, Democratic candidate for Georgia governor. And Leader Abrams, thank you so much for being here. I have to start with that because I feel like a narrative is sort of congealing among much of the political press that comes from Republicans, but it is settling in even amongst some folks in my profession, that because lots of people turned out, 857,000 so far and counting, that means that there is no voter suppression in Georgia. But I note, as I did in the intro, that it's largely, substantially more Republicans. They're not the ones who have long lines. They get to breeze right through. They're not the ones who have suppression, and this is in-person voting. This isn't mail-in. What do you make of this new narrative?
Well, I think the most important piece is to winnow it down to this. The equivalent of saying that more people voting means there's no suppression is like telling people that if you get in the water, there are no sharks. If more people get in the water, there are fewer sharks. There's no correlation there. Voter suppression is about blocking or impeding certain types of voters from participating in elections. And as you pointed out, right now, Republicans have the most competitive elections. But what we also don't know is what is the mail-in ballot rejection rate? What are the difficulties people are having? But we do have some very real examples of what this law precipitated. Spalding County eliminated Sunday voting, something that was used by a burgeoning African-American community to stop their participation in elections. We know that across the state, the change in state elections boards have changed how people engage. We know that people who would have voted by mail are having a difficult time doing so because of the wet signature requirement that you have to print it out, sign it, and then take a picture and upload it and send it back, as opposed to being able to simply fill it out and send the absentee ballot request and then send your ballot in. And so what is happening is that people are looking at one metric and trying to extrapolate an entire narrative. And the narrative is very clear. Voter suppression is not about stopping voting. It is about impeding certain voters from participating. And those voters, as you pointed out, are unlikely to be highly active in a primary. But that said, we do know that we are seeing outrage driving voters of color to the polls. And that's the other thing that we used to say, and I said constantly, the antidote to voter suppression is voter turnout. Yeah. They're going to try to make it hard, so the more of us who show up, we overwhelm the system with our presence. But to let them off of the hook for what they've done simply because they didn't do it as well as they thought is, I think, nonsensical. Well,
and also because the law they put in helped more of their voters turn out. Well, that doesn't say there's no voter suppression against the other voters. It says it helped their voters. And anyway, well, let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on because you ain't making no damn sense, right? Yeah, let's move on, right? Ain't that right, Joy? Because, guys, all of a sudden now, voter suppression doesn't mean suppressing people from turning out to vote, right? That's not what it means anymore according to the Democrat Party, right? For whatever reason, we got the definition of what voter suppression means wrong. So they're trying to change it, despite the fact that people like Joy Reid, last year when this law was being passed in consideration, telling us that they were going to stop people from being able to vote in all types of ways. Take a look.
They're going to lock off every way that you can vote. This is the end of democracy in America. This is the beginning of the South Africa strategy. It's old school American. It's Jim Crow American.
So I want y'all to understand here. I want y'all to understand. Joy Reid last year said the Republicans were going to lock off any way that you can vote, right? Any way that you can vote, they was going to lock it off. That is Jim Crow. That is South Africa, is apartheid, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward a year after Georgia has record voter turnout for the primary. Well, that's not what we meant by voter suppression, right? We didn't mean turnout, okay? AKA, I didn't mean what I said just a year ago when they said we're going to lock out every way that you can vote, which means in person, mail-in ballot, like any way that you can vote. They were going to stop black folks from voting, right? And they now shifted that to mean, well, what we actually really mean is that they just have these laws that, you know, make it so people have to jump through extra hoops to vote. That's actually what we mean. And that is suppression of vote. Even though we don't have one fact or statistic to back that up, right? We have no facts or evidence to back up the claim that the Republican voting laws, because they're more restrictive, is actually keeping people from voting. They don't have one. And they will never have one because they don't have any facts or evidence to back up these wild claims, right? They have none at all. Okay, and that's what really blows my mind and pisses me off about this, because they come out here and they march out here and they say this stuff, but they don't have evidence, right? You don't have evidence. Give me one. Give me one statistic to prove to me that the Georgia election integrity laws have kept somebody from voting. They can't. They don't have any. They don't. But they sit here and they say, well, more people showing up to vote is not evidence. That's not evidence. Don't look at that, right? Correlation doesn't equal causation. And she's right about that. Correlation doesn't equal causation. However, increased voter turnout would suggest that these laws are not as restrictive as you claim, because if they were so restrictive, then how come so many people are turning out? Well, it's the Democrats that they're suppressing, right? It ain't the Republicans. It's the Democrats, right? Their votes are being suppressed. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Considering how you said yourself that the Democrat primary wasn't as competitive, because only Stacey Abrams is running, right? So not as many Democrats voted. So how can you make that claim? You don't have any evidence to back up that claim, right? But they're going to make that claim anyways. And I guarantee you guys, the midterms, they're going to be record turnout there as well too, right? It's going to be record turnout in the midterms. And I guarantee you they're going to come out here and say, well, despite there being record turnout in the midterms, there would have been more people had the GOP not suppressed the vote, right? They're just going to say it no matter what, because it's a rallying cry in order to get people to vote. It doesn't mean that it's actually real. They just say it and they put it out there. It's a boogeyman to get people to vote, even though, logically speaking, if you're able to vote despite these laws, that means that your vote is not being suppressed. It simply means that people who actually want to vote will vote, right? Despite whether or not the law is in place or not. Okay? But again, we shouldn't be surprised that Stacey Abrams here is pushing election conspiracies because she has a history of doing it, right? These people want to talk about the big lie, okay? But why don't you talk about the big lie that Stacey Abrams told back when she lost the last governor race, okay? When she came out here and basically said that Brian Kemp stole the election from her, okay? Made a false claim because of voter suppression, right? Again, voter suppression was in existence back then when she lost, and she claimed that was the reason why she lost. The false claim, right? The false claim. But in 2020, there was also record turnout. So again, somebody make it make sense. Somebody make it make sense. How does voter suppression work, right? Does voter suppression actually mean people not being allowed to vote? Or does it mean simply that any law that the GOP passes having to do with elections that the Democrats don't like? Right? Because I think that that's what it means, right? I think it means any law that the GOP passes that the Democrats don't agree with, that is voter suppression, right? If it has anything to do with elections. I think that's what it means. But at this point, I'm convinced. And I hate to say this, but there's just no evidence to support Stacey Abrams' claim. So I got to come to some type of conclusion here about where she's getting this voter suppression conspiracy from. Because I'm starting to believe that the only thing that's suppressing her from voting is carrying her weight to the polls to vote, right? So maybe if she fixes that problem, her vote won't be as suppressed. But hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a black conservative perspective. Peace.